They laughed when the janitor sat at the $200,000 piano, but when his fingers touched the keys, the whole room forgot how to breathe. The Lexington Performing Arts Center glowed under the stage lights that night. Every red velvet seat had been dusted to perfection, gleaming softly beneath the golden chandeliers hanging overhead. The faint aroma of expensive perfume and the clinking of crystal glasses would soon fill the air. Boston's wealthiest and most powerful gathered for the annual Lexington Foundation Charity Gala. And right there, in the middle of that grand stage, amid the light and low murmurs of the upper class, stood a man quietly bent over, his gloved hands carefully polishing every brass hinge of the glossy black Steinway piano. His name was Ethan Morales, the 39-year-old janitor at the Arts Center. The dark green maintenance uniform, worn thin at the shoulders, the scuffed rubber shoes, the tired eyes, they made him almost invisible in the dazzling world that was about to unfold on the very stage he was cleaning. But perhaps no one knew that every time he wiped the keys, something profound inside him trembled, as if those keys still remembered the fingers that once belonged to them. Ethan had been doing this job for nearly 3 years now. It was stable, required no degree, and gave him flexible hours, enough to pick up his 7-year-old daughter Lily after school, to have dinner with her, to tell her bedtime stories before she fell asleep. A simple, repetitive life, unremarkable. Yet in his eyes, there was always a shadow of sorrow, a quiet ache that had no name. Years ago, Ethan had been a student at Juilliard. They used to call him the Golden Fingers, a prodigy with a brilliant future. But everything shattered after the accident that took away his young wife. From that moment on, Ethan knew no stage would ever matter more than the small dining table where his daughter waited for him each night. Tonight, as he polished the piano he once dreamed of performing on, Ethan smiled faintly. A smile laced with regret, yet touched by peace. He whispered, almost to himself, "Some dreams don't die. They just sleep, until we're brave enough to wake them." From the corner of the hall, a few stagehands passed by. None of them noticed him. And that was what Ethan knew best: invisibility. What he didn't know was that, in just a few minutes, every eye in that glittering room would turn toward him, not because he was the janitor, but because he was about to make everyone fall silent. The sound of leather shoes tapping lightly on the wooden floor echoed, steady, confident, and commanding. Charles Whitmore, 55, CEO of Whitmore Capital, the man behind most of the city's grandest charity galas, entered the hall. He wore a handcrafted Italian black tuxedo, a Patek Philippe glinting on his wrist beneath the chandelier lights. Around him, a few prominent guests who had arrived early chatted and laughed softly, their champagne glasses trembling slightly in rhythm with their elegant laughter. Charles lifted his chin, scanning the room. His eyes stopped at the center of the stage, where Ethan Morales was still bent over, polishing the last few keys of the piano. A half smile curved on Charles's lips. He turned to the group beside him and said, with a hint of mockery, "Even the janitors here look more focused than some of my employees." Polite laughter rippled through the small group, refined, but cold. Charles walked closer to the stage, admiring the piano, and said casually, "Tell me, Morales, have you ever played something more than a mop?" Ethan paused. He looked up, saying nothing for a few seconds. His gaze was calm, respectful. Yet behind it was an entire world buried deep within him. "A little, sir," he said softly. "Just a little piano." Charles chuckled, this time a genuine laugh. A few nearby guests turned around intrigued. They began to whisper among themselves. Did he say piano? A janitor? Oh, this will be good. The stage lights now seemed to highlight the distance between two worlds. One, tailored tuxedos and polished shoes. The other, a faded uniform and calloused hands. Suddenly, Charles turned toward the audience, his voice booming with the confidence of a seasoned host. Ladies and gentlemen, before our official performance tonight, it seems we might have an unexpected warm-up show. Our janitor here says he can play the piano. What do you say we let him entertain us for a minute? A wave of laughter swept through the room. Some clapped mockingly, while others raised their phones ready to record a little fun before the real concert begins. Every face wore the same look: curiosity, disdain, and that special kind of amusement reserved for those certain they're about to witness a joke. Ethan stood still, his hand tightened around the cleaning cloth. His heart pounded fast. He knew this wasn't an invitation, it was a challenge wrapped in polite laughter. If he said no, they'd think he was arrogant. If he said yes, they'd laugh even harder. Under the bright hall lights, he felt smaller than dust. But deep inside, something began to move, like a small flame coming back to life. He slowly lifted his head and looked straight at Charles. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, steady, and firm. You want me to play? All right. But don't expect this to be a song to laugh at. The room fell silent for a brief moment. Then the laughter returned, louder, more raucous, as if everyone was eager to see how this little performance would end. Ethan took a deep breath. He set the cloth down, walked calmly to the Steinway, and sat. He adjusted the bench, each movement precise, deliberate, and unexpectedly professional. Then his hands hovered above the keys. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but because his soul had just touched something it had lost long ago. The air inside the hall seemed to freeze when Ethan Morales pulled out the bench and sat before the Steinway. The faint scrape of his work uniform against the leather seat sounded dry and awkward in that glittering room. A few guests were still chuckling. Several phones were raised, ready to capture the funny moment of the evening. Light poured down from the high ceiling, glinting off the sweat on Ethan's hair, making him appear both humble and strangely solemn. He lifted his hand and brushed the keys. The cool touch sent a shiver through his fingertips. How many years had it been since the last time he touched a piano beneath true stage lights? He drew a deep breath, closed his eyes, and then the first notes of Clair de Lune began to flow. The sound wasn't loud, yet it carried enough to make the entire room fall utterly silent. The melody rippled softly through the walls, seeping into every breath, every gaze. Those who had been smiling moments ago now lifted their heads, their eyes wide, their expressions confused and disbelieving. No one could have imagined that these rough, calloused hands, hardened by mops and cleaning fluid, could glide across the keys with such precision and tenderness. Debussy's notes melted into the air, rising like silver mist. And Ethan, he was no longer sitting there as a janitor. He had become himself again. In every note were the years gone by, the sleepless nights holding his little girl when she asked, "Daddy, why don't you play the piano anymore?" The image of his late wife, her smile still alive in memory. The silent promise he had never spoken aloud. "I'll come back, for you. Not on a stage, but in our daughter's heart." Each tone lingered, resonating through the hall. A lady in the front row slowly set down her glass, lips trembling.
Oh my God. He's not just playing. He's feeling it.
Ethan opened his eyes and glanced at the audience and saw something he had never seen before. Absolute silence. No laughter, no disdainful looks, only reverent stillness, as if everyone feared that breathing too loudly might shatter the fragile spell. Charles Whitmore, the man who had mocked him, now stood frozen. His eyes locked on Ethan's hands, lips pressed tight, speechless. The confidence of a billionaire who thought he had seen it all was replaced by awe and shame. Then, as the final note faded, Ethan let his hands fall. No one clapped. Not because they didn't want to, but because they hadn't yet escaped the moment. The silence was so deep, you could hear the trembling breath of someone in the back row. And then, the first clap broke the spell. Slow, measured. It came from Charles. Another joined in, then another, until the entire hall erupted in applause, people rising to their feet, cheering, clapping endlessly. Ethan sat still, head bowed. In his eyes shimmered something between tears and light. Not sorrow, but release. 10 years of silence, of a dream locked away, now spoken again through music. He stood and bowed gently. The stage lights reflected off his worn uniform, and for that brief, brilliant moment, it looked like a tuxedo worn by a true artist. They saw a janitor, but the piano saw an artist. When the last note of Clair de Lune faded into the air, the entire hall remained standing in silence. The stage lights dimmed gently, reflecting off Ethan's face, damp with sweat, yet calm. His eyes glowed, as if he were seeing a piece of himself he thought it had been lost forever. And then, through that quiet stillness, the first applause broke out, from Charles Whitmore. No laughter, no arrogance, only genuine respect. He walked toward the stage, step by slow step, not with his usual brisk confidence, but with quiet reverence. When he reached the final stair, Charles stopped. His voice dropped low, a little unsteady. My God, where did you learn to play like that, Morales? Ethan bowed his head slightly, his voice soft but clear. Juilliard, sir. I was once a concert pianist, but my wife passed away in an accident 4 years ago. Lily, my daughter, was only 3 at the time. I had to choose the stage or her, and I chose to be a father. The room fell silent again, this time out of sorrow. No one laughed now. Some lowered their eyes. A few women quietly dabbed at tears with their handkerchiefs. In that moment, all differences, status, power, wealth, simply dissolved. Charles looked at Ethan, his eyes heavy, not with pity, but with awakening. He realized he had mocked not just a janitor, but a father, an artist, a resilient soul. How long have you been working here? 3 years, sir. And no one knew you were a professional pianist? Ethan smiled faintly. His voice was calm, steady, but warm. I came here looking for stability, something that let me have time with my daughter. People here only need me to keep the floors clean, not to remember who I was. And I never wanted to use my past to be treated any differently. I just wanted to keep this job, because it gives me the most precious thing, time with her. Charles said nothing. A long, heavy pause lingered between them. The air was thick with emotion. Then he spoke softly, his voice trembling just slightly. Morales, I owe you an apology. Not just for laughing at you, but for forgetting that true talent knows no rank. I looked at you through your uniform, not through the man wearing it. Ethan answered quietly, yet with deep resonance. You're not the only one, sir. The world moves so fast these days. People only see the clothes others wear and forget to look at their hearts. Applause rose again, not loud, but filled with reverence. Charles nodded slowly, his eyes glistening with a mix of remorse and admiration. If you're willing, Morales, you won't just be the janitor at Lexington anymore. I want you to be the one who fills this place with your music. Charles Whitmore still stood there. His eyes were transfixed on the man in a dust-stained green uniform, a man whose hands had just made an entire hall forget to breathe. He drew a deep breath and said softly, Ethan, if you don't mind, could you play one more piece, something of your own? Ethan looked at him and smiled. It was no longer a shy smile, but one filled with a rare and quiet peace. He turned back toward the piano and sat down again, no trace of trembling this time. His hands rested gently on the keys. All right, sir, but this one isn't for you. It's for a little girl waiting for me at home. The entire hall fell silent once more. The lights dimmed, leaving only a single soft beam illuminating his hands. And then, the music of Canon in D began to flow. The melody wasn't grand or showy, but it reached deep into the soul. Every key he touched seemed to carry the rhythm of his heartbeat, steady, tender, and full of love. The sound spread through the room like warmth seeping into a cold Boston night. In that stillness, Ethan was no longer a janitor, nor a forgotten musician. He was simply a father, playing a lullaby for his child with everything left in his heart. And in that moment, the entire hall seemed to see Lily, not the real child, but the reflection of their own children, their loved ones, the people they had traded time with for the sake of ambition. A lady in the front row raised her hand to her mouth. A middle-aged man turned away quietly, wiping his eyes. Charles Whitmore, the man who once laughed, stood utterly still. He looked at Ethan, but in his mind he saw his two grown sons, successful, accomplished, but distant. And he realized, perhaps he too had forgotten how to play music with his own children. The notes of Canon in D felt like a gentle reminder that in all success, in all striving, there is one thing that can never be replaced: love and time. The piece ended. Ethan sat still, head bowed, eyes closed, as if listening to the echo of his own soul. And this time, the applause wasn't just applause. The entire hall stood in tears. No one spoke. No one clapped for technique. They clapped for something truer, something beautiful that had just been revealed. In that moment, there were no millionaires, no employees, no ranks or titles. Only people, face to face with their own humanity. Charles stepped onto the stage, his voice breaking slightly as he said, "Ethan Morales, today You achieved what the most incredible music in the world strives for. Not to make people admire, but to make them remember who they are. The applause still echoed through the Lexington Performing Arts Center. People weren't clapping for skill alone. They were clapping for a soul that had just been awakened, and for themselves, for being reminded of something profoundly human and beautiful. Charles Whitmore walked back onto the stage, his eyes still red. He looked at Ethan, then turned toward the hall. His voice was no longer the commanding tone of a gala host, but warm, trembling slightly with genuine feeling. Tonight, we came here to support the arts. But perhaps, art has chosen its own way to teach us a lesson. We just witnessed the most incredible talent of the evening, not from a professional performer, but from a father, a human being. The hall fell silent again. Ethan bowed his head, humbled. Charles stepped closer, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said gently, "Ethan Morales, the Lexington Foundation would like to do something, not out of pity, but out of respect. We will fully sponsor your return to music, a concert performance, and a scholarship fund, so you can care for your daughter while continuing your path." Ethan looked up, his eyes glistening. In that moment, the years of silent struggle, the sleepless nights worrying for his daughter, seemed to dissolve away. He spoke slowly, voice thick with emotion. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you enough. But if there's one thing I must be certain of, it's that everything I do must still revolve around Lily. She is the most beautiful melody of my life." Charles nodded, smiling softly. "A father like you, Ethan. This is the reason art continues to exist. Because art isn't born just to be heard. It's born to make hearts feel." The hall erupted in another wave of applause, this time not of sympathy, but of deep, genuine respect. 6 months later, the screen fades in. Ethan Morales, now dressed in a simple suit, sits before the same black Steinway piano at the Boston Symphony Orchestra's evening concert. The hall is packed. In the front row sits a little girl with brown hair and bright eyes, Lily Morales, wearing a small white dress, her hands clutching the old bracelet her father once wore. A radiant, proud smile lights up her face. Ethan begins to play Clair de Lune, the exact piece that made the world fall silent that night. The notes rise, still gentle, still pure, but this time they are different. In every sound, there is faith. Faith that the past isn't something to hide, but something beautiful to carry forward. In Charles Whitmore's office, a framed photograph hangs on the wall. Ethan, in his janitor's uniform, seated at the piano. The stage lights were glowing around him like a halo. Beneath the photo, a handwritten quote reads, "The greatest treasures often wear the dust of ordinary days." One autumn afternoon, Ethan walks hand in hand with Lily through a park near their home. The little girl skips along and asks, "Daddy, people say you're a famous musician now. Are you happy?" Ethan smiles, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm only happy when you're here, listening to me play. Because success is just the applause. But you are the music." Lily looks up, squints, and whispers like sharing a secret. "I always knew that, Daddy. You're the best pianist in the world."
Not because you play on big stages, but because you never let me fall out of rhythm. The camera slows. Father and daughter walk off into the golden sunset. The soft strains of Canon in D swell in the background. On screen, words fade in. Don't judge a book by its cover, because sometimes the janitor is the symphony. True worth doesn't lie in what job you do. Stimulate in how you do it, and the heart you bring into it. Ever believe your dreams are dead, challenger, just because you had to close that chapter for a while. This is Deep Life Tales, where every story reminds us that kindness, sacrifice, and real dreams still live among us. If this story touched you, like, share, and comment on what moved you most. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes one story at the right moment can change the way we see the whole world. Success is just the applause, but you are the music. Ethan Morales. The greatest treasures often wear the dust of ordinary days. Charles Whitmore.